Outgunned is a cinematic action RPG by Two Little Mice, the creators of the RPGs Household, Broken Compass, and Memento Mori, all of which I've covered on this channel. I also previewed Outgunned while it was crowdfunding on Kickstarter, and that project turned out to be a great success, producing the core rulebook, a supplement for John Wick-style adventures called World of Killers, and another supplement that provides rules for sci-fi, superhero, and supernatural adventures called Action Flicks, and Project Medusa, a mini-campaign they call a mission dossier. In this video, I wanted to cover the quick start for the next Outgunned campaign on Backerkit, Outgunned Adventure. At the time of recording, the project is live and you can check out more about the rewards and the pricing structure, but here I'm just going to be covering the free 73-page quick start for the supplement to give you an idea of what it's trying to do. A link to the campaign is at the top of the video description. I think the most important thing to note about the supplement, and this is something I almost never see, is the fact that the full supplement will stand alone as a full playable game, but one with fewer of the core mechanics than what you would find in the core rulebook. In other words, Outgunned Adventure is like a sort of middle ground between a quick start and the core rulebook, which gives people the option of an Outgunned Light. I found this intriguing because the full rules for Outgunned are not what I would consider rules heavy by any stretch. In fact, I think one of Outgunned's greatest strengths is its ease of play and accessibility for casual GMs and players who would rather just show up at the table and play an action movie rather than sift through rules minutia. I can't see this becoming a common practice with RPG publishers, giving customers a standalone game with every supplement, but I do think it is a very pro-consumer, customer-first move to do this. It is worth noting that previous Outgunned supplements, World of Killers and Action Flicks, do in fact require the core rulebook. But Two Little Mice is trying something a little different this time, and I hope people appreciate it. So the game itself is based on a few principles. One, it's trying to emulate an action movie. In the case of this supplement / game, Outgunned Adventure, it takes place in the 1920s and 1930s, and the goal is to find treasure. Quote, "The most important thing is the treasure, not the journey." Outgunned Adventure is supposed to be the first in a series of so-called genre books, which add or expand some mechanics from the core rules, including stuff regarding the supernatural. If you're thinking that this seems a lot like what they've already done in World of Killers, which goes 200 pages deep into a John Wick-style movie emulation, then you're right. From what I can tell from this quick start, Outgunned Adventure is looking to be kind of like World of Killers in that it will be zeroing in on a particular subgenre. But of course, this time with the option of just being able to play the game outright without the core rulebook. In this case, it's pretty clearly Indiana Jones emulation that they're going for with the 1920s to 1930s era, the treasures, and here the mention of the supernatural relic hunting Nazis. I'm not even going to try to pronounce that. Players in the quick start can choose from 4 different pre-generated characters, each representing a unique archetype or role, but obviously you'll be able to make your own with the full book. The Daredevil is a stand-in for Dr. Jones himself, or maybe Brendan Fraser from The Mummy, or Lara Croft, or The Rock from Jumanji. The other roles in the quick start are the captain, the professor, and the smuggler. As far as the mechanics go, you've got 5 attributes and 4 skills under each attribute. Anytime you need to make a check, you add the rating of a core attribute plus the rating of whichever skill you're using. That's how many d6s you will roll. And if you have an applicable piece of gear for the situation, you can get +1 die or an extra success, or even the ability to make the roll in the first place. Success comes in matching faces. If you're using the specialty dice that come with Outgunned, it's extremely straightforward. If you're using standard numbered d6s, then you have to force your brain to stop thinking that higher is better. There's no connection to the numerical value of the faces when rolling tests in this game. You're just looking for matching faces. These terms actually come up a lot in the game, so you need to have a cheat sheet or write this down or memorize it. 2 of a kind is a basic success. 3 of a kind is a critical success, 4 is extreme, 5 is impossible, and 6 is a jackpot. Challenges are named after these success levels. So for example, a basic challenge just means you need to roll a 2 of a kind. But there are all kinds of things that can happen with a roll and things players can do. Let's go through a few of them quickly with an example encounter. Let's say our American captain here is squaring up against a Swedish Baroness villain, and the captain is going to try and use the speech skill to convince the Baroness that she doesn't have the relic in her possession, that it was lost in the chase. When you use a skill such as speech, you'll find it nestled under the smooth attribute, but it's important to remember that you can actually pair a skill with any attribute as long as it makes sense. So maybe since the captain is lying in this case, we would use speech with the crime attribute, which in this case would give us 4 dice to roll. We don't have any feats that would affect this skill, nor do we have any gear that applies, so it would just be 4d6. The GM would need to come up with a difficulty rating. Let's just say for example's sake that it's a basic challenge, since the Baroness is super drunk at the moment. If we roll our 4 dice and get a 2 of a kind, that is a basic success that passes the test. If we rolled a 3 of a kind, that would be a critical success, which means the GM can grant a better outcome or a narrative advantage of some sort, such as the Baroness calling off her henchmen and deflating the danger of the scene. If it's the case that we rolled only 1 basic success, we can actually re-roll all the dice that weren't a part of a combination. If our re-roll is better than the first roll, that is by enhancing an existing success with more matching faces, or by creating new matching sets, then we get to enjoy the new results. But the risk here is if our new roll doesn't actually produce any better results. In that case, we would lose all of our previous successes. It's a very simple gambling mechanic that comes up frequently in the game, really one of the hallmarks of this system. There's actually also an all-in mechanic where after a free reroll, if you want to roll any loose dice again, you can, but if you don't produce any upgrades to your previous rolls by rolling matching faces, then you will lose all of your previous successes. One of the principles that the game designers here emphasize is that even when a player fails a roll, the narrative shouldn't stop. Here are 4 alternatives to just having a scene stop dead in its tracks if a player fails a test. There's actually a different class of rolls that all use the same dice mechanics that we've discussed, except the consequences of failure are not narrative, but rather a loss of your grit, which is the game's version of hit points. These kinds of rolls are called dangerous rolls, and they are denoted with a skull icon whenever they're referenced. Depending on how hard the challenge is, you could end up losing a certain amount of grit if you fail. One thing to note here is that if you're required to get, say, a critical success, which is a 3 of a kind, but you only roll a basic success, a 2 of a kind, you are able to mitigate the incoming damage with that lesser success that you rolled. So in the case of a dangerous roll, you could reduce grit loss by 1, for example. Mitigation like this also applies to regular tests as well. The way grit works is that you fill up this row of 10 boxes on your character sheet as you take on stress and damage. Once you hit the 8th box, you suffer a condition that the GM comes up with. And when you reach the last box, you get 2 luck points. When you've lost all of your grit, you still operate normally, but the next time you lose grit and there are no more grit boxes for you to mark, you have to make the death roulette roll. This actually requires a numbered d6, and the result needs to be higher than the number of marks that you have in your lethal bullet tracker. If you roll higher, then make a mark on that tracker and continue playing. If you roll equal to or lower than the number of marks currently on that tracker, then you are left for dead unless another PC can save you. To recover grit, you can sleep, take a breather, or get your grit back at the end of a session. There's not really any elaboration on this in the quick start, so it all seems extremely generous in terms of grit recovery. Combat is interesting in that they designed it so that players do all the dice rolling. Even though the quick start here briefly describes combat, it doesn't actually provide an example enemy anywhere, even in the example one-shot that's included. So I'm going to cheat a little bit and pull some stuff from the core rulebook in order to explain it to you. And just to be fair, I'm sure Two Little Mice will have more combat rules explanation in the full Outgunned adventure book. Essentially, if you want to attack an enemy, you look at their defense. If their defense is basic, then you need to roll a 2 of a kind to land a hit. And if you do hit, then they lose 1 grit. If you roll 2 of the required successes, then you do 2 grit worth of damage. And if you roll a success that is 1 higher than required, then you do 3 grit worth of damage. When you are being attacked, you roll a dangerous roll based on the attack rating of the enemy. If that enemy, for example, has a critical rating for their attack, then you need to roll a 3 of a kind to resist the attack. And if you roll extra successes when defending, you could end up earning the ability to strike back. Here's a list of some of the new mechanics that aren't actually covered in the quick start. Probably the most notable of these is the chapter on supernatural abilities and enemies, presumably written and illustrated in the context of an Indiana Jones themed setting. The sample one-shot adventure that takes up half the quick start is the first of 3 one-shot adventures that create a mini campaign called The Fall of Atlantis. It is composed of 6 scenes that put you in Greenland in search of Eric the Red's tomb. The one-shot is structured as a linear series of challenges that takes you into a frozen cave laden with campy Indiana Jones style puzzle traps, and then into a frozen Viking ship that's teetering over a deadly chasm drop. I think the biggest takeaway from this one-shot is that it really tries to teach you how to pace a session in terms of constant threats and how to make them unique or novel in some cinematic way. For example, at the end of the session, the PCs will find themselves on that frozen ship, and every time they fail a roll when poking around on the ship itself shifts in one way or another, and they provide some suggestions on how the ship shifts, which is really helpful in getting into the mindset of an action movie director. Alright, here are my thoughts on the Outgunned Adventure Quick Start and what I'm hoping for from this project. Could have used an enemy. I think most RPGs these days really sort of expect you to fight enemies in one way or another, and I don't think it would have been revealing too much to include a few enemy stat blocks in the one-shot or in the rules section of this quick start. But anyway, I cheated and showed you some in this video. So if you don't have the core rulebook, you can at least adopt what I've shown you here in order to spice up the one-shot in this quick start if you plan on running it. Some product line confusion. I think it's clear if you take a closer look at the Outgunned product lineup, but at a quick glance, it can be a little confusing as to what's what. Maybe because of the generic titles of everything. But just to recap, in order to actually be useful here, Outgunned is the name of the game and the core rulebook. World of Killers is a 200-page expansion that details new enemies, new hero types and tropes and feats, setting details, and a 100-page campaign, all focused on the subgenre of John Wick-style gun-heavy action movies. This supplement requires the core rulebook. Action Flicks is a 200-page supplement that touches on 11 different action movie subgenres, each with far less detail than World of Killers, but all very inspiring. This supplement also requires the core rulebook. Mission dossiers are campaigns that can be played in 3 to 4 sessions and come with pre-generated characters and everything needed to get playing quickly, but obviously those require the core rulebook as well. Outgunned Adventure is this upcoming supplement that contains an abbreviated standalone version of the core rules and goes deep into an Indiana Jones inspired setting that leans on the supernatural and relic hunting Nazis and all that. So there you go. Standalone product. I've mentioned this several times already, but I do appreciate that the creators are including a set of usable, playable rules in this supplement. It means that they're trying to meet new customers halfway here and not force them to buy the core rulebook right away. It's a great approach that I'd love to see more creators try. Very approachable mechanics. I love how the dice work in these 2 little mice games where you're just looking for matching faces. And even though there is some amount of depth with the dice, like using lesser successes and all that, it's just dead simple. And the gambling mechanic of re-rolling and re-rolling again at the risk of losing all your successes on a test is just a lot of fun to be had. Admittedly, it's all super meta, and it's going to turn off some simulationists and literalists who want to feel like there's no gap between the rules and the narrative being described. But if you just want casual fun trying to emulate an action movie with a bit of ridiculous casino gambling thrills on any given turn, this really is an ideal approach. Some new mechanics. I appreciated the fact that the creators are actually offering some new game mechanics in this next expansion. I'm curious to see the chapter on supernatural stuff and to see if it differs much from the chapters in Action Flicks that describe Stranger Things, Harry Potter, Ghostbusters, and Blade. Everyone knows action movies. One of the greatest things about trying to play an action movie RPG is the fact that most people have seen at least a couple dozen or maybe even a couple hundred action movies in their lives, so they have an internalized idea about how a scene might work and how pacing works. This is a huge advantage when trying to run or play a game like this. Compare this to, say, trying to run a game of Dune Adventures in the Imperium. That's a game based on 2 novels, but really technically 6 core novels, most of which people have never read and never will. It's a really rewarding sci-fi story, rich with deep setting and cultural details, but it's hard to find people who are actually read into those novels and who are willing to play the RPG. Action movies, on the other hand, are a very common foundation of cultural reference, and that makes them a very convenient framework for an RPG. Realized product. I think at this point, Outgunned is a pretty fully realized RPG product line. I thought the first 3 books, the core book, World of Killers, and Action Flicks, were actually pretty comprehensive already. But when you throw in this Indiana Jones treatment as well as a possible second Action Flicks supplement, as hinted in this quick start, it really starts to paint a picture of a very fleshed out role-playing game ecosystem. Art and layout. The art and the graphic design are organized together to make a really attractive and readable manual. I hope to never start taking for granted really nice interior layout and design when I see it, but I think it can be easy to do so with companies like Two Little Mice because they never seem to miss a beat with the visuals, and they can really spoil you after a while. So yeah, I'm really hoping that Outgunned Adventure brings some new stuff to the table. I can't say if they're going to nail this one for sure, so to get a lot more details about the project and to possibly throw in your support, click on the link below and read all about the campaign rewards and the additional features that may not have been mentioned in this quick start. And let me know down below if you've run or played Outgunned. I'd love to know about your experiences. And thanks as always for watching. See ya.